It will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
It looks like Trump is continuing to pull his moves right out of the Nazi playbook by going after transgender people first. You guys remember those book burnings, right? Well, it's important to note that that book burning took place at the Institute of Sexology, which pioneered work on transsexual understanding and calls for equality for homosexuals, transgender people, and women. So I guess it shouldn't surprise anybody that the Nazis are doing the same thing twice. But it looks like what might end up saving us from fascism is Trump's own incompetence.
Just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan.
I have concepts of a plan.
We're going to take a look at exactly what the executive order says here in just a second, but if you're enjoying the video, make sure to hit the like button and double check that you're subscribed. Before we take a look at the wording of this disastrous executive order, let's check out what the Republicans are claiming this order does.
However, some conservatives argue this is not an act of transphobic practice, but a move to streamline government processes.
With the transgender issue, and him only recognizing two sexes, it really just makes it a more simplistic format for the U.S. government.
This executive order fulfills a campaign promise early in Trump's administration.
It's totally not going to affect any of their rights, and I think it just ensures that people are equally protected, that one side is not given a minority's chip where they are able to play a lot of cards that a majority of the population would not be able to play.
That kid is the future of Republicans? The kids are not all right. But that is the perception of what this law is doing. Somehow overturning the unfair feminist laws that have made it so difficult for men to get their fair share. But what's interesting about this order is that both this kid and Donald Trump himself are wrong about the order declaring there are only two genders, male and female. It says, it is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female. These sexes are not changeable and are grounded in fundamental and incontrovertible truth. Sex shall refer to an individual's immutable biological classification as either male or female. Sex is not a synonym for and does not include the concept of gender ideology. Gender ideology replaces the biological category of sex with an ever-shifting concept of self-assessed gender identity, permitting the false claim that males can identify as and thus become women and vice versa. No one has ever made this claim. No one thinks this but conservatives. So what this order attempts to do is define biological sex and not gender. In fact, it goes on further to remove gender ideology and all gender terminology from the federal government's language and verbiage. And this marks the first hilarious mistake of this order, because this order does nothing to dispute what trans people and trans activists have been saying. At no point did anybody argue that there's some third biological reproductive sex. Every single transgender person knows what biological sex they were born as. This is like when conservatives yell at trans women that they can never have babies, as if trans women are claiming that they somehow developed a womb just because they had top surgery. Sex and gender are two different things, which is what we've been screaming for years. And while this order sort of recognizes that fact, it goes on to describe what biological sex is in the most idiotic way. Female means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. Male means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the small reproductive cell. What about men who can't produce sperm? What about women who don't produce eggs? What about people who are born with both male and female reproductive tissue and can't produce either? Are they male or female? Or what about this? A community in the Dominican Republic where boys don't grow their penis until they are 12 years old. Most of them are raised as girls because they have what appears to be a vagina. Were they girls until they became boys? Would they be legally transsexual? And putting aside the large and the small reproductive cell issue for a second, at conception doesn't make any sense. At conception, there's just one cell, and no real way to determine which sex the cell is. Even with the presence of a Y chromosome, it might not develop into a male. And on top of that, this definition says nothing about chromosomes. It's about the sex that produces large and small reproductive cells. But don't take it from me, here's a woman with a PhD in biology. Dr. Emily Willingham. Conception results in a single cell that does not have gonads or make gametes. Obviously, it's weeks into development before the organs for pelvic anatomy start to be established, and even then, how they'll develop isn't given. During development, a mix of structures can be retained. Plenty of people born XY walking around with little fallopian tube remnants. People don't start producing small reproductive cells until they enter puberty. So does that mean that boys are non-gendered until they start puberty? Are we going back to the late 1400s? When the word girl meant child of either sex? It seems like that's exactly what this executive order calls for. The large reproductive cell technically isn't produced unless a sperm fuses with it. Does this mean women aren't legally women until they become pregnant? Trump wants to release a bunch of Matt Gaetzes on our daughters in order to turn them into women. During development, the cells that will give rise to future small and large reproductive cells can settle in a way that ultimately the precursors for both will be made. Some people develop in a way that leads to no production of reproductive cells of any kind, large or small. Chromosomal complement does not infallibly predict these outcomes. That's what I was saying before. Just because you have an XX or XY chromosome does not reliably determine if you will develop female or male reproductive organs, which will determine if you produce large or small reproductive germ cells. This is how biology works. As Dr. Willingham says, external and internal anatomy and physiology do not infallibly align, much less fall neatly into a binary. I've heard it described that sex is best understood as not binary, but bimodal, where things tend to land either left or right, but it can be somewhere in the middle, like a light switch. Yes, there's off, yes, there's on, but you can get it somewhere in the middle where the light starts flickering. Of course, the GOP could care less what scientists say. They don't even believe in climate change when half the country's on fire and the other half's underwater. If there's one thing we can know for sure is that they're going to keep showing that they're dumb as rocks. I guess that's what happens when you burn books instead of reading them. I'm Tony Hinderman with Really American, and I'll catch you next time.